All right, so we continue, our series in through the book of Hebrews, and it's been I think I've said this many times, but it's been a very impactful and interesting series for me, digging into the book of Hebrews. So I'm going to do a quick little recap since it's been a few weeks since we've been into this. First of all, who was the book? Let's see how well you guys have been listening. Who was the book of Hebrews written to? This is an important part of understanding what Hebrews is all about. Who was it written to? Anyone tell me? Okay, Hebrew Christians who had left Judaism, and they had become Christians. They believed in Jesus as the fulfillment of I guess you could say Judaism, that Jesus was was the Messiah, and so why was it written? What was the purpose of writing this book to Hebrew Christians, Hebrew believers? Don't be shy. What was their situation? They were having a hard time. They were being persecuted for their faith. They were being persecuted because of what they believed. So they were having a hard time, and they were obviously tempted to give up, to give it all up. And that's why the book of Hebrews was written. It's pretty obvious. It's very interesting the way that there's so much that could be said about the way that Hebrews is written, and so many there from a literary standpoint. I'd encourage you to dig into that a little bit. We haven't really gone into that very much, but some very, how would you say, deep literary methods used in writing this book that would have meant, I think, a lot to the readers, the original readers, but that we don't really get. We may touch on that just a little bit this morning, I'm not sure, but the writer, first of all, has a little bit of an introduction and then goes on to describe Jesus in many different ways as being the fulfillment of God's story, you could say, God's plan. First of all, talked about Jesus being a better messenger, about Jesus being a better man, better human, about Jesus being a better Moses, that he provides a better Sabbath, a Sabbath rest. We talked about that. He's a better high priest. He's a high priest after the order of Melchizedek, who understands our struggles because he took on our weakness. He became like us, even though he was God. And he introduced a better covenant. It talks about the fact that the things of the old covenant were copies or shadows of the real thing, which is what Jesus introduced. And under the old covenant, blood had to be offered into sacrifice. Blood had to be shed and sacrificed continually over and over and over and over again to cover the sins of the people. Well, Jesus introduced the real thing when he brought his own blood. He lived a perfect life, sinless life, unblemished, brought his own blood to make sacrifice once and for all. And his sacrifice does what the others couldn't do. We talked about that, I think, in our last sermon on Hebrews. His sacrifice does what the others' sacrifices couldn't do. It cleanses our conscience, gives us a clean conscience. And he was victorious over death. And then, what did he do? He sat down. Why did he sit down? Because it was done. It was complete. He had offered the perfect sacrifice and was victorious over death, that peace was complete. And he sat down, it says. So, because of that, the writer goes on to say, don't give up. Don't throw away your confidence in Hebrews 10, verse 35. I'm going to start in verse 37 of Hebrews 10, actually, because even though there's a chapter break there wasn't a chapter break there when this was written, and the thought continues to flow from chapter 10 into chapter 11. So to tie those two together, we're going to start at verse 37 of Hebrews chapter 10. And I'm going to grab a little bit of water first. Hebrews 10:37, for yet a little while, and the coming one will come and will not delay, but my righteous one shall live by faith. And if he shrinks back, my soul has no pleasure in him. But we are not of those who shrink back and are destroyed, but of those who have faith and preserve their souls. Then it's like the writer's saying, okay, let's talk about faith a little bit. Goes on and says, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for. The assurance of things hoped for. And this isn't just a willy-nilly hope. This is the kind of hope that's based on something that we can be confident in. It's the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. For by it the people of old received their commendation. By faith we understand that the universe was created by the word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things that are visible. By faith Abel offered to God a more acceptable sacrifice than Cain, through which he was commended as righteous, God commending him by accepting his gifts. And through his faith, though he died, he still speaks. By faith Enoch was taken up so that he should not see death, and he was not found, because God had taken him. Now, before he was taken, he was commended as having pleased God. And without faith, it is impossible to please him. For whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists, and that he rewards those who seek him. By faith, Noah, being warned by God concerning events as yet unseen, in reverent fear constructed an ark for the saving of his household. And you remember that story, how that for all those years he was working on that ark, even though there had been no rain, and even though everyone else was mocking him, he continued to do that by faith. By this he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness that comes by faith. By faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. And he went out, not knowing where he was going. By faith he went to live in the land of promise, in a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God. By faith Sarah herself received power to conceive even when she was past the age, since she considered him faithful who had promised. Therefore from one man, and him as good as dead, were born descendants as many as the stars of heaven, and as many as the innumerable grains of sand by the seashore. This next paragraph, from verse 13 to verse 16, I'm going to read from the NIV. I usually use the ESV version, English Standard Version, in the pulpit, but when I read this paragraph in the NIV, it spoke to me. The language conveys the message to me in a clearer way. So I'm thinking maybe that may be the case for you as well. So I'm going to read this next paragraph from the NIV. It says, all these people that we just got done talking about, were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance. All these people never got to see the fulfillment of the promises that they had been given. And yet they were still living by faith when they died. It says they only saw the promises, or the fulfillment of the promises, off in the distance, at the time of their death, their whole life and their death, and they welcomed them from a distance. That word welcome means to be happy about or to anticipate with pleasure. It's the kind of, it's used to describe a greeting. A greeting, if I was going to greet you, I would welcome you. And in this way, in this type of greeting, if I was going to greet someone, we all have our different way of greeting people, but if I was going to greet someone in this way that I'm happy about, that I anticipate with pleasure, I'm probably going to give them a hug, because that's what I do. I like hugs. Maybe you don't. You might give them a handshake or go so far as a pat on the back or something like that. But I'd probably give them a big hug. That's what we're talking about. That's what these people did, even though they lived their whole lives in anticipation of the fulfillment of these promises that they had been given, and they never got to see the fulfillment of that, yet still they embraced those promises to the very end of their lives. They had faith. That's what faith looks like. And it goes on and says, and they admitted, and this is key. I love this paragraph. This is key to why they were able to do what they did. And they admitted that they were aliens and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had opportunity to return. They could have said, I'm not seeing the fulfillment of this promise. Forget it. I'm going back. Going back where I came from, which is exactly what the people that this book was written to were being tempted to do. Because things were hard, things were difficult for them. They were ready, or they were being tempted to throw in the towel and just go back to where they came from, not in a physical sense, but in a spiritual sense. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had opportunity to return in 16. Instead, they were looking for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God. Oof, that's powerful. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. All these people that we just got done talking about were not going to see the fulfillment of the things that were promised in their lifetime. They weren't going to see those things. They had received promises, but they would never in their whole lifetime get to see those things come about. They only got to see glimpses. The fulfillment of those promises was off in the distance, and yet they embraced those promises, and they stood firm in that. Why? I believe that it's because they knew that there was more. They understood that the story was bigger than them. God was doing something big, and they were a part of it. And he goes on later, the writer goes on to bring that out. God was doing something big, and they were part of it. They wouldn't know in their whole lifetime what all the pieces were or how they would fit together. But they could be okay with that because they trusted the one who was writing their story. They lived their whole lives that way. No, they weren't perfect. They made mistakes. Sometimes they took matters into their own hands and tried to write their own story, and they made a mess. But in the end, they kept the faith. The events of my life don't always go the way that I envision them. Some things I don't understand. But knowing that my life is part of something much bigger than me, knowing that my story is part of a much bigger narrative, and that the one who's writing that narrative knows what he's doing, That allows me to be okay if this part of my story is difficult. And I don't see that storybook type ending for myself. Yes, that's what I would want. I would want, in the stories and in the movies and things like that, there's always the struggle. That's what makes a good story. There's always the struggle. But then we like in the end when everything comes around, everything turns and there's a good ending. If I don't see that type of ending for myself, if things don't turn around in favor of my comfort or my happiness, it's okay. It's okay, because when I take my last breath on this earth, that's not the end of the story. My story is only part of something much, much bigger. By faith, Abraham, verse 17, he doesn't stop there, but he continues. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was in the act of offering up his only son, of whom it was said, "Through Isaac shall your offspring be named." He considered that God was able even to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. By faith, Isaac invoked future blessings on Jacob and Esau. By faith, Jacob, when dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph, bowing in worship over the head of his staff. By faith, Joseph, at the end of his life, made mention of the exodus of the Israelites and gave directions concerning his bones. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw that the child was beautiful, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. He got it. He understood it. At least enough that he was able to do that. By faith, he left Egypt, not being afraid of the anger of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. By faith, he kept the Passover and sprinkled the blood so that the destroyer of the firstborn might not touch them. By faith, the people crossed the Red Sea as if on dry land. But the Egyptians, when they attempted to do the same, were drowned. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell down after they had been encircled for 7 days. By faith, Rahab the prostitute did not perish with those who were disobedient, because she had been given a friendly welcome to the spies. And what more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets. There's so many more people that we could talk about, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. I'm thinking, okay, I get it. Sign me up. I want to be part of that. Let's go. Verse 35, women received back their dead by resurrection. Yes. Some were tortured. No. Refusing to accept release so that they might rise again to a better life. What? Others suffered mocking and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned. They were sawn in two. They were killed with the sword. Wait a minute. This isn't what I thought I was signing up for a minute ago. I like the part about faith conquering kingdoms and justice being enforced and mouths of lions being stopped, quenching the power of fire and escaping the edge of the sword. I don't like this being sawn in two stuff. This sounds very painful. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered about in deserts and mountains and in dens and caves of the earth. Many of these people had stories that ended in triumph and victory and joy. Many of these people had stories that ended in pain and suffering and mistreatment. All of these people had stories that ended the same way. They kept their faith. They were looking ahead to something better, to a better life. And all these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised. Even the ones who had endings that I would choose still didn't receive what was promised, since God had provided something better for us, that apart from us, they should not be made perfect. All this was coming together so that we can the whole big picture can be made perfect, complete, all together, them and us. So therefore, because of that, since we're surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, picture a race in the first century of the Roman Empire. Probably would have been in some kind of arena, right? Picture yourself running in that race. I hate long-distance running. I always liked sprinting, but I couldn't stand long-distance running. But this is talking about a long-distance race, a long race. Picture yourself in that arena in ancient Rome. The stands are full of people. It's a long race, and you've been running for a long time, but you've been running strong. But you're wearing down. You're starting to fall back. You're tired. It hurts. You start to think, who cares? Maybe I should just give up. It hurts. And then you hear them yelling your name. They're yelling like those crazy Northwood football parents down the road here in Napanee. They get a little bit too rambunctious over there. You're wearing down. You're ready. You're wondering, should I just give up? Should I give up this race? I'm not going to win anyway. I don't think I can make it. And then you hear them yelling your name. And they're yelling, run! Run! Don't give up. You've got this. Run! It's not quite the way they do it at Northwood, but close. And you look up, and there's Abraham and Moses and Gideon and David, Esther and Ruth, Rahab, people who ran long, hard, difficult races. And they stayed faithful to the end. They kept running even though their life was hard. There's John the Baptist. There's Stephen. Maybe Felix Mons and Dirk Willems. Maybe people like Jim Elliott. People who gave everything, who ran with everything they had. They left nothing on the field, left nothing on the track. Can you imagine? How could I not keep running? How could I not pick up my pace? I saw a video of a little, I don't know, he was maybe 8 years old or something like that. It looked like some kind of cross-country type race. And this little guy was running, and he was back, I don't know, probably 10 back in the pack. And all of a sudden, he came around, and there's his mom, and he hears his mom's yelling, "Go, go!" And all of a sudden, you can tell exactly when he hears her. All of a sudden, he's like passing up 5 people, flying ahead, and then the video goes. It's her videoing, and she's following along because she's running along, and the phone is bouncing as she goes. And you hear her yelling, and then all of a sudden, there he goes again. He gets another burst of power, and he runs out. Pretty soon, he's all the way out in the front of the pack because he heard his mom yelling for him, cheering for him. I'm not saying that all these people are up in heaven like spectators watching you run your race and cheering for you. But I do know that their lives bear witness that inspires me to keep on running in that same way, as if they were right in the stands and yelling for me to keep going. It inspires me because I know that they did it. They kept the faith, and they kept on running to the end, and they won the prize. Inspires me to keep running, and not only to keep running, but to keep running like I want to win. Hebrews 12:1. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely. Let's get rid of that stuff and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus. We haven't even talked about Jesus. We've just been talking about all these other people that have gone before. Looking to Jesus, the founder and the perfecter, the completer, the finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. I'm imagining all those people encouraging me to keep running, and then I see Jesus even. How can I stop? How can I give up? Consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. In your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. And have you forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as sons? My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor be weary when reproved by him, for the Lord disciplines the one he loves, and chastises every son whom he receives. We don't have time to get into this discipline part, but I do want to say this. Discipline and punishment are two different things. Discipline, sometimes they're connected. Discipline has to do with training and shaping. It is for discipline that you have to endure. God is treating you as sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? If you are left without discipline, in which all have participated, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. Besides this, we have had earthly fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them. Shall we not much more be subject to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time as seemed best to them, but he disciplines us for our good, that we may share his holiness. For the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. Therefore, lift up your drooping hands, I love this verse, and strengthen your weak knees, and make straight paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be put out of joint, but rather be healed. I don't know where you are this morning in your race. I know parts of many of your stories. I don't know the whole of your stories. I don't know where you are this morning in your story. But wherever you are, I want to encourage us to be like those people that I was talking about here who were able to see past the pain of the moment, the difficulty, or maybe the joy and triumph even of the moment, and see that their life, that their story was part of something much bigger. And because of that, they were able to go through the good times, the bad times, and keep their focus on the goal. And my prayer for all of us is that we can keep our focus on the goal and keep running and encourage each other to keep running. We need that. We need to encourage each other, and we need the encouragement in order to keep running. I want to be that kind of person that can be that kind of an encouragement to you. If you're struggling, I want to be able to come alongside you and say, run, keep running. Don't give up. And I hope that you can be the same for me in those times when I get discouraged. I can hear you over there somewhere saying, "Run, go, Joe, keep going, don't give up." We can all experience the fullness of what God has for us. Let's pray. Father, this morning, I thank you so much for all of this great cloud of witnesses, all these people who have gone before us, who have given us an example of what it looks like to run the race well, through good times, through bad times, through victories, through times of defeat and struggle. But Father, may we run with determination. May we encourage each other to keep running. Father, help us to have that eternal worldview that allows us to look beyond what we're going through right now and to see, have a vision for the promises that are maybe off in the distance yet. Help us not to give up, not to shrink back, but to keep going, to hold firm our faith. I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.